Izgubili smo svu publiku. I will switch to English since there's a mixed audience, I guess. What you just witnessed is quite a typical example of problems when somebody tries to use an open source system on a hardware that is not really designed for the open source system, and that's what happens. Everything breaks down completely, and we have just sort of saved ourselves by switching back to good old Windows here from Linux. But anyway, that's not so important, but it's sort of part of the topic actually of my talk today, which is connected to a project called the Arctic Perspective Initiative, and the work that we have been doing for the past 5 years in the Arctic, and for the past 15 years sort of in the framework of another project which is called MacroLab. And both of these projects are basically defined as technical media projects. The Arctic Perspective Initiative is sort of a derivative, a future derivative of what MacroLab in a way was and what it stood for. MacroLab was the project that was conceived in 1994 during the times of the wars in Yugoslavia. And the first idea was, for the project was to create a sustainable environment, sort of a sustainable space-time capsule where artists, scientists, and technical media workers could work completely autonomously in what I at the time called insulation-isolation conditions, where sort of insulated and isolated from the surrounding society, being placed in strategic sort of places with history. In the first emanation, this was a former Cold War listening post in the Western Germany, hilltop of Lutherberg near Kassel, and then all of the other places that we have chosen for the MacroLab in its sort of 10-year lifespan were mostly contested areas. The project has developed since it's an architecture, solar wind-powered architecture that enables the work of 6 to 8 people for extended periods of time. The longest sort of MacroLab duration of operations was for one crew was 3 months. The project was set up also in very remote areas. This is Rottnest Island in Western Australia, and which was the former military sort of island, and is nowadays serves as a kind of a paradise for white Western Australians, but it has also very contested history, because the island is actually called Wajimuk, and the Aborigines, the inhabitants, the original inhabitants of Australia, were actually put there in concentration camps in the beginning of the 19th century. That sort of history is erased now with this kind of leisure paradise that Rottnest Island is at the moment. What we did on the MacroLab was do research and work in 3 fields, very widely defined: telecommunications, migrations, and weather and climate. And project during its running from 1997 to 2006, where sort of after that we took it into the next phase, accumulated a large amount of materials, a lot of telecommunications interceptions was going on, a lot of telecommunications traffic mapping, but also a lot of art projects. More than 150 participants were part of the project during its duration, but it was sort of embedded in our, in the sort of intersection between the art world, the technical media world, a little bit of the open source community. Things like the Free Swan project was developed. We worked on that project for the total encryption of the internet for IPv6 with a group of developers from San Francisco. This was actually on Rottnest Island. Well, in 2001, also that project was stopped by the US government, and IPv6 that nowadays doesn't have this sort of encrypted wide area network ability, sort of embedded in the protocol itself. One of our last long duration setups was on this island. This island is called Cambalto, and this is a picture of the Marko lab from satellite, actually. It's an auto portrait of the laboratory. You can see it on the island, sort of shining in the lower left corner. When the QuickBird satellite flew over, we made arrangements because we had equipment with which we could decode this imagery with the company, and we sort of clicked this auto portrait of the lab, just to show also the capabilities that we had at the time. It was a completely solar and wind powered environment, of course with an emergency power system which was running on natural gas. And people were able to work there for a very, very long time. Marko Lab has had, from its beginning, wanted to basically be set up, end its life in a way in the Antarctic. That was the sort of utopical aim of the project. We wanted to move it to Antarctica and the Arctic, to the Earth's poles, and stop the project as Marko Lab and start a new initiative which was called ITASC, Interpolar Transnational Art Science Constellation. And within ITASC, 4 sort of missions to Antarctica were done, and we had plans to build this station, which is called Vladimir Antarctic Base. But at the same time, we also started working in the Arctic. And the Arctic is a very different place from the Antarctic in all senses. First of all, the Arctic is very close to the Northern Hemisphere. So it's closer to what we consider sort of the Western civilization, if you want. Secondly, the Antarctic has this beautiful protocol from 1961, which is still an amazing document even nowadays, the Antarctic Treaty, which gave a whole continent a status of a continent, a landmass, without a nation state. There is no state in Antarctica. Antarctica is stateless. All the claims to Antarctica were frozen. Well, the Arctic is a completely different story. As you can imagine, as you can see from this map, it's surrounded on one side by Russia and as a state, a little bit of Northern Europe with Finland, Sweden, and Norway. Then we have Iceland. Then we have Greenland, which is a colony of Denmark. Then Canada and the US. And these are the nations that are still nowadays, of course, very interested in this region for a variety of reasons. On the Russian side, we have enormous natural gas and oil deposits, which of course extend into the Arctic Ocean. And if you read the news recently, there's a lot of movement around that, actually, with our good old friends from British Petroleum, which also plan to drill in Antarctica, by the way, but they just don't tell us this, but they have been doing work connected with that in the past 2 years in the name of science. And we have, of course, Greenland, Nunavut, which is the autonomous territory in Canada, Alaska, Chukotka, which is sort of on the upper side of this map. The north is, of course, in the center, so I cannot use north, south, east, west in a way. Everything is south when you're in the Arctic, and that's really interesting. And we are southerners when we come there. But one very, very important point for us when we engaged in the Arctic was that the Arctic was, first of all, a territory where the Cold War was really happening on all levels. Submarines chasing each other under the Arctic ice. The missiles that would be launched would fly over the Arctic. And on the United States and Canada side, we had a long sort of radar station chain called the Distant Early Warning, the DEW line. That chain is very important for these stories because all of these stations were, not all of them, more than 3/4 of them were abandoned, created a lot of pollution, but also a lot of sort of material was left there. And that material is, of course, being used by who? It's being used by the people who actually live in the Arctic for thousands of years. They always were there. The Southerners just behave as if they were not. And that's one of the major problems that we see there. The first contact with the northern peoples from the south was through the whaling. And as you probably know, the whaling almost destroyed completely the whale population in the Arctic Ocean. In the beginning of the 20th century, there were hardly any large whales left in the Arctic Ocean. But this is also the Arctic nowadays. And this is a quiz. Anybody can recognize any of these flags?
Yes.
Which one?
Alaska.
Okay. Another one? Anybody? Alaska?
Greenland.
Greenland? It's very good too. All of the other flags are flags of Arctic, independent and autonomous territories. From Sami to Krasnoyarsk, Yakutia, the one with the fox is Northwest Territories, which used to be both in Canada, and the one with the star that the Inuit really joke, it's the Pope's flag. It's this one. It's from Nunavut, and that's where we did most of our work. This is a map of the Arctic people, sort of through their languages. On the Russian side, on the Siberian side, some of them are closely related to sort of people they have Indo-European origins, Asian origins, from the same group. Whereas on the US side and in Chukotka and in Greenland, there's a completely different story, and that's sort of the Inuit in Greenland and Nunavut, and what we call the Yupik in Alaska, and the Aleutian group of sort of native peoples, and the Chukchi, which are more related to sort of the people from Eastern Asia. They moved there thousands of years ago. And this is the indigenous population versus non-indigenous population sort of statistic. And as you can see, we have a very, very large proportion of non-indigenous population in Russia, which is not a coincidence. During Stalinist times, Russian Arctic was populated with gulags, as we know, and the cities that served the gulags and serviced them. So in the Russian Arctic, we actually have urban settlements, cities. That's not the case for the rest of the world, except for sort of a few which are considered cities in Finland and Norway, and maybe the two capitals of Greenland and Nunavut, Iqaluit and Nuuk, but they are not, you wouldn't consider those cities. They have a few thousand inhabitants, each of them. So, as you can see, the picture is pretty sort of grim. There's a very, very small amount of native population, except in Canada and in Greenland, right? The other, Alaska and Russia, have a very different sort of demographics. What is most important in the Arctic for the people who live there is the land, is the animals, is the food, is everything that their lives and livelihoods depend on. And that's part of the story of our project. And that's why we concentrated our project in this direction after many years in sort of a completely different direction. This is a photo of one of our workshops in the Arctic. This is August Black, sort of a floss developer, and we were actually teaching a group of Inuit that we work with, actually, from Ilulikisuma Productions, how to use open source tools for media authoring. And we did not have the same kind of projector problem as we have today here, which I still really want to find out what it exactly was. But anyway, so part of the activities of the Arctic Perspective Initiative is creation of this kind of teaching and learning situations. We teach and learn from the Inuit. We basically exchange knowledge on one side, technical knowledge, or sometimes conceptual knowledge, and traditional knowledge, sort of the knowledge about the land, and the knowledge about the Inuit way of life is sort of coming also back. And it's a process that has been really rewarding. This is a project that we were not involved in, but we also I'm including it because it's a typical example of, and very similar to what we are doing at the moment, and is a project that happened during the International Polar Year, of which also the ITASC was part of. It's called the Iglinit project. This was run by a friend of ours called Sherry Gerhardt in the community of Clyde River. And it's a project of Inuit mapping, basically with contemporary tools. That's the idea. Software was created to go out on the land and map the resources of the land sort of from the Inuit point of view. And that's really important, because as the sort of Southerners and colonialism started in the previous century, I mean, 2 centuries ago, maps were created, of course, in the Arctic. But those maps didn't consider anything remotely Inuit in any kind of way. They were maps of maybe resources and navigational maps for the whalers, and they gave strange names to features in the Arctic, like Queen Elizabeth Sound and Prince Albert this, Princess Vespa that, and so on. So everything was completely sort of mostly Anglo-Saxon oriented nomenclature in all of the mapping. But the Inuit, of course, had their own names for things on land. You know, the big rock near the sea, the rock where the walrus are, Seal Cove, and so on. But they didn't create, of course, maps. Well, nowadays, we have tools and the capability of creating this kind of maps, and there has been numerous projects in the last few years, and one of them is the one we are involved in also as the Arctic Perspective Initiative, to sort of remap the Arctic from the native people's point of view. And that's very important, with, of course, contemporary technology. And this is a screenshot from one of the Iglinit computers. As you can see, there's a very simple user interface where you can sort of map wildlife and features on the land. And the maps that were created on these missions were like this. This is from the Iglinit project, the 2 maps. This other map that I'm showing you here is part of a project that we are also partners of, and it's called, it's run by the Inuit Heritage Trust in Iqaluit, and it's basically a remapping of the whole of Nunavut. This is now just concerning Nunavut, but there's initiatives underway in other Arctic places. And this remapping with traditional place names is now going on. There's a few scientists working on, there's us, there is, of course, also some of the native people. And our mapping efforts have started 2 years ago, and for that we also created a lot of tools. Macrolab was sort of also a tool-making laboratory. A lot of ideas came from the lab, especially on the sensor side, where the lab suddenly became very, very small, and it was really strange to actually sort of project and get data from outside of the laboratory, even though we were very well connected to the world through telecommunications. So we started creating small sensor networks, and for the Arctic, out of experience from our first expeditions, we created this system which is going to be published in our next series of books. They're all downloadable on the website, but we also published them in a small amount in paper form, which will be devoted totally to technology that we are working on with our friend Evan Hyde at the moment. And that will be sort of like a technology manual for the Inuit, for the sort of other native people of the Arctic, and for the people like us or you who want to sort of engage the Arctic in a little bit more different and sustainable way. And one of the plans is also for this power system. Our expeditions in the Arctic included work sort of on the sea, together with Inuit elders. We traveled around Foxy Basin and did a lot of mapping with this tool. We developed this unmanned aerial vehicle as a result of the work on Macrolab. Macrolab, we wanted to have also this capability. And in 2005, the first prototype flew. And now, basically, 5 years later, we have a system that is quite capable and reliable that we are using a lot to do all kinds of mapping, and we have done 2 mapping campaigns in the Arctic together with the people there on our expeditions with the elders, and now we are basically creating first kind of composite orthophoto pictures like this one, and you wouldn't believe, but of course the Arctic was mapped and photographed by the Canadian government, but 25 years ago. So the communities don't even have contemporary sort of maps. They don't have pictures of what is actually going on in their communities. So they really welcome this instant mapping tool, which with our unmanned aerial vehicle, you can basically fly it autonomously. It takes these pictures and then you stitch them together in a matter of hours. And you have this kind of mapping product that you can then annotate or to rectify, put in other kinds of mapping softwares, in GIS programs and so on. This is an example of Iglulik, and here we have, for example, the area of Ikpik Bay, which is a bay on the western coast of Baffin Island. During our trip, we were trying to be connected to the world. This is a satellite system, also sort of a hacked satellite system. It's a stationary geostationary system that is meant to be sort of attached to houses, but we traveled with it out on land and were actually able to connect to geostationary satellites. Still, we were just below, they were just above the horizon, so we could still see the satellites, and we basically streamed live also from the Arctic. One of the projects that we developed, a lot of data is collected, as you can imagine, also through the sensor networks. One of our main projects that we are working on at the moment is a sensor network called Tatsipak, Feel by Touch. It's a mesh network sensor system, and it's a small box that you can attach to your skidoo or your boat, or when you go out on the land, and it collects all kinds of environmental data from very usual ones, temperatures, sun radiation, color temperature, to particulates, and we can attach, it's modular system, so we can attach to it, nowadays very popular again, Geiger counters and things like that. So, it's a mesh, so basically it collects its data, and when it comes into proximity of other sensors, they exchange this data, And when one of these comes to a node, then this data is downloaded and put on the networks. And one of the things we developed is this CDPDU. It's called Common Data Processing and Display Unit. And it's basically a common data format display system. It's written in a language called Lua-AV. I work on this, and still it's a work in progress with my students. It's an open source project. And the idea is that you can throw all kinds of sensor data formats at it, and it will try to make sense of it. It will put it into, into grids, displays. If there are photos, satellite images, it will put them in kind of geographical order and so on. So it's a little expert system for data. But it's also a piece of hardware that you can sort of take with you out on the land, or you can take it to a lab or wherever you need it. So it's a rugged system. That was the idea, that you can sort of take it with you. We can also control our unmanned aerial vehicle from it when needed. But life in the Arctic sometimes looks like this. Western tents don't really work, so you have to improvise. And here we were, for example, stuck on this island of Maniktuk with a few elders for more than a week because the ice was completely not moving. We couldn't fly, it was completely foggy. So we sort of hit the limits of our technology. Our next project that we are working on is this mobile sledge system. Kamotik is a traditional Inuit design, and we are putting on top of it this kind of aerodynamic, living, working shell. Again, to be able to work out on the land for very long periods of time, but not needing any kind of fossil fuels, completely solar-powered, wind-powered sort of environment for 3 people to work out on the land a few days. Because this mapping project is an ongoing, as you can imagine, project that deals with the idea of understanding, mapping, remapping the land, and also with the notion of renomadization. The people in the Arctic were forced by the white man to live in settlements in the 50s, 60s, and in Russia even, of course, in the Soviet Union in the 30s and 40s. And they were forcibly put into matchbox houses, or, in the Russian case, in blocks of flats. And we're told, you stay put now, you're no more nomads. You'll get a job in the factory, or, in the case of Russia, or no job whatsoever in the case of the West. Just stay here. We want to sort of control the land. You are not allowed to sort of use the land as you used to anymore. That is changing, but of course people got used to technology and throughout these periods. So there is a very, very fine balance between the use of technology and the dependence on technology. There's a lot of black box technology that is everywhere in the Arctic, from an outboard motor on, that is not made to survive those conditions. And that creates all kinds of strange problems and strange attitudes toward materiality. So what the Arctic Perspective Initiative is trying to do is to bring technology with very, very small steps, if you want small amounts of very precisely targeted technological systems that can be developed also together and furthered in the Arctic, that enable sort of this renomadization and a sort of a quicker path towards autonomy. Because the only solution, in my opinion, for the Arctic is its very, very strong autonomization. Because otherwise we will witness what we have witnessed everywhere around the world. The pressure is on. The Arctic is really a point of very, very strong contention. One of the things we are doing, for example, in the Arctic, if you want to eat vegetables, they come in by plane, and they call, an apple costs $5, or a salad costs, $8. One of the projects we did, and we are developing now, is the system of mobile hydroponic containers that will be deployed in different settlements in the Arctic, where people will be able to grow their own vegetables in the hydroponic way, because the diet has changed too. I mean, people don't live anymore only from the land. And that's the problem. There's a very, very strong sort of economical dependence. And this hydroponic gardens is something that is very important for us. Of course, the Arctic is ruled by animals, mostly, not by people. And that's another consideration to take care of when you sort of design systems for that. Our friends, when we first came and they saw our design in the Macro Lab, the first thing they asked is it polar bear proof, this machine of yours? And we never even thought about that, of course, or what that would mean. Well, we had an encounter with a polar bear. You can do your research on that, maybe on YouTube. It ended well for the bear and for us. Since we were so late, I will leave it at that. You can find me here if you want to talk further. We are, of course, you can find us on arcticperspective.org. This is our website of this project in particular. My previous presentation included some videos and so on, but unfortunately we had to switch to Windows. And this is my email if anybody wants to talk to me, but you can find me online. Thank you very much.